Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, diplomacy deteriorating as the threat of war in Eastern Europe grows. This morning, increased fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine after a high-stakes UN meeting leads to a heated exchange between Russia and the U.S.
The situation we're facing in Europe is urgent and dangerous. This is as clear and consequential a threat to peace and security as anyone can imagine.
Now, President Biden insisting the U.S. is ready no matter what happens. We have team coverage from Kyiv to Washington. Key witness, major developments in the investigation into the Capitol insurrection as the former chief of staff to then Vice President Mike Pence testifies before a House committee. What we're learning about his testimony and what it means for the investigation. 1-2 punch, tens of millions of Americans bracing for another winter storm. This morning, watches and warnings in effect from the south to the northeast, with many parts still digging out from last weekend's blizzard. And not even the Sunshine State can escape the deep freeze. We're tracking the latest conditions. And big buyout. Everyone's favorite 5-letter puzzle just got a 7-figure deal. Details on Wordle's massive acquisition by the New York Times and why the news has some players UPSET.
I don't know if that was one of the words yet. Do you play Wordle?
I don't. You do, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm all in.
I'm worried I'm going to, fall into that trap, and then it's like all I'm going to do.
Just
every
one a
time I have
day.
minute.
Just a few minutes a day. It's something to look forward to.
How long does it take you to do one?
Minutes.
Yeah. Minutes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, there you go. All right.
Very
That's
good.
a sell. I'll give it a shot. All right. We begin now with those continuing building tensions in Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin is set to hold a news conference today as Russian troops gather on the Ukrainian border.
This comes after an angry exchange on the floor of the United Nations. The Russian ambassador claimed the U.S. was trying to whip up hysteria, while the American ambassador warned of horrific consequences if Russia invades Ukraine.
The discussions about a threat of war is provocative in and of itself. You are almost calling for this. You want it to happen. You're waiting for it to happen, as if you want to make your words become a reality.
This is the largest, hear me clearly, mobilization of troops in Europe in decades. And as we speak, Russia is sending even more forces and arms to join them. If Russia further invades Ukraine, none of us will be able to say we didn't see it coming, and the consequences will be horrific.
We have a team of correspondents bringing you the latest on the high-stakes negotiations. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin is in Kyiv, and we're also joined by White House correspondent Carol Lee. Aaron, we're going to start with you. Ukrainian leaders have pushed for calm, but in the aftermath of yesterday's diplomatic dust-up at the UN, what are they saying about the path forward?
Hey, Joe. Well, the Ukrainian president up until this point has been, as you say, urging calm, essentially downplaying the threat, saying that he does not believe that Russia will invade Ukraine. But at yesterday's UN Security Council meeting, there was a shift in tone from the Ukrainian ambassador to the United Nations, not only during the meeting itself, backing up the United States assessment of the situation, but following the meeting, saying that he agrees that a potential attack could be, quote, imminent. And that is a departure from what we've been hearing from other Ukrainian officials of late. And I've been having conversations with experts here in Ukraine, and they say that there is a bit of a division in Kyiv itself. You have the political establishment that's urging this calm, not wanting people here in Ukraine to panic. But then you have experts who are familiar with the situation, as well as members of the Ukrainian military, saying more needs to be done to present a unified front against this Russian aggression. I was speaking to one hybrid warfare expert who was telling me that she's been seeing an increasing number of hybrid warfare type attacks on Ukraine from Russia. And she says that President Zelensky could be doing more. Take a listen.
I think that his message is a bit vague and unclear when he's saying that we should save Ukrainian economy and the threat is overestimated. I think that's not how Ukrainian experts and military people see it. I see that the risk of escalation is high. I think that the Ukrainian president could be much more, first of all, grateful for the international support he gets these days, but also much more vocal about the threat.
President Zelensky is expected to meet with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson here in Kyiv. There will be a press conference later today. All eyes will be on President Zelensky's tone, especially given what played out in New York yesterday.
So, Carol, the White House has said diplomacy is the plan. We know Secretary of State Antony Blinken is set to meet with his Russian, or speak with his Russian counterpart this morning. So far, we've only seen, though, the continued buildup of Russian troops. Now reports say Russia is sending blood to those troops on the Ukrainian border. So how is the president responding? Any chance we could see a pivot here?
Well, Joe, I think what you're seeing from the administration in the past few days is really an escalation in terms of rhetoric on two fronts. One, real warnings, stark warnings about what it could look like if Russia does invade Ukraine. And you heard the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, recently say that this could wind up being horrific and that there would be a lot of casualties. So and you heard, again, the U.S. ambassador to the UN sounding these similar tones yesterday at that meeting, really laying out the stakes here and what could happen both to Russia and to Ukraine. So there's that piece of it. And then you have the sanctions piece of it, the response piece. And you hear the U.S. increasingly being vocal about what types of sanctions Russia would face if it does invade. And they're saying they're bringing the hammer, sanctions that Russia has never seen before, and that the response would be swift and sweeping. And so those are ways of them trying to deter Russia from invading. At the same time, we know from talking to administration officials, and they've said this publicly, they really want a diplomatic solution. They don't want this to go to the space of that they've been outlining, where they've said that what a war could actually look like and what the sanctions could look like, because that could come back and hurt the U.S. economy and Europe's as well.
So, Aaron, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that Moscow is putting 5,000 troops in Belarus, that's just north of Ukraine. Now the State Department is ordering American families and government officials out of there. Quickly, what can you tell us about what's happening in Belarus?
Well, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations yesterday saying that more Russian troops are on the way. They expect up to 30,000 to be deployed to Belarus. The Belarusian representative to the United Nations yesterday saying that they are there for military exercises expected to take place later in February. But it's clear that the United States and other Western allies are not buying that line, essentially ordering the families of government employees out of the country, urging people not to travel to Belarus, with a warning saying not only is there this military buildup, but there's also the threat of arbitrary detentions as well as arbitrary enforcement of the law there in Belarus, Joe.
And Carol, Aaron mentioned that British Prime Minister Boris Johnson plans to travel to Kyiv today to discuss the Russian troop buildup. Quickly, how is the White House trying to line up U.S. allies so everyone is on the same page here?
Well, they're having repeated conversations with the European allies at all levels. And one key meeting to look forward to, Joe, is next week when President Biden is expected to host the new chancellor of Germany. Germany is key in this, and the White House is really trying to get them on board. The president saying yesterday, diplomacy is really the path that he would like to see this go.
Carol Lee and Aaron McLaughlin, thank you so much.
Now, there's new information this morning in the ongoing investigation into the attack on the Capitol. The House committee investigating the January 6th insurrection has received new testimony from Mark Short, who was the chief of staff to former Vice President Mike Pence. Short was with the former vice president in the Capitol on January 6th, and he's now one of the highest-ranking officials within the Trump White House to testify before the House committee, especially as so many have chosen to not cooperate. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins us now. Ali, good morning. So what do we know about Short's testimony to the committee? What did he tell them? And what does this mean for the investigation to finally have a key player within the Trump White House willingly cooperate?
Yeah, Savannah, I mean, I know the story has been how many people have said they won't cooperate, and certainly that is an important thread in this. But what we're seeing with people like Mark Short, who was a top and longtime advisor to the former vice president, what we're seeing with Short cooperating is that there are key people in this White House who are talking to the committee, and in Short's case, giving lengthy testimony last week, according to the sources who confirmed this deposition to us. And what it shows is that the committee is hearing from the people in the top reaches of this White House. Even if people like Mark Meadows aren't cooperating, we know that they've had informal conversations with people like Bill Barr. We know they've talked to Kayleigh McEnany, who was the White House press secretary at the time. There are people in the upper echelons of the Trump White House who are cooperating. Short, though, provides some really interesting insight because he worked for the vice president and was with him on January 6th at the Capitol. That wasn't the only key place that Short was, though. There's also other meetings that Pence was a part of with the former president in the days leading up to January 6th. We know that there were sustained pressure campaigns on Pence from people like Trump to overturn the election results, and especially in light of the comments that the former president made over the weekend where he said that Pence could have overturned the election in Trump's own reading of the Electoral Count Act, which the Senate, by the way, is still trying to reform for that reason. Given all those comments, it makes all the people around Pence that much more important, the insight that they can give into that day and what the former vice president was hearing specifically from Trump.
And Allie, what about Pence? I mean, does this set the stage for him to potentially testify?
Look, I can't presuppose anything at this point, but what we're seeing is that Pence could testify. We know that he's one of the people that the January 6th committee would probably like to speak to. At the same time, though, we're seeing that even if that doesn't happen, they are talking to the people who were physically around him on January 6th. Remember, the day that the vice president had to be evacuated from the Capitol because rioters were going through that building chanting things like "Hang Mike Pence."
And Allie, quickly, I want to ask you about a report from the New York Times that gets at a little bit of what you were talking about a minute ago, sheds light on former President Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Now, NBC News has not yet confirmed this report, and we've reached out to the Trump team for any response. But walk us through what this report suggests here about Trump's priorities after the election.
It sort of builds upon reporting that was already out there about the idea of draft executive orders that would have asked different government agencies to seize election machines and ballots. Now we're seeing that former President Donald Trump may have been closer to those efforts, according to the New York Times, trying to leverage at least 3 government entities, the Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and Department of Justice, asking people within each of those entities or having his aides and allies do so if they could legally seize voting machines. In the case of 2 of those agencies, the New York Times is reporting draft executive orders that would effectively ask them to seize those voting machines. And I can't underscore enough just how stunning these revelations are. It shows that as we learn more and get more distance from January 6th, we're getting more information about the role of the president himself at that time. And certainly that's a key focus for the January 6th committee.
Absolutely. Allie Vitale, thank you so much.
Over in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing a torrent of criticism after initial findings of the so-called Partygate Report were released. The report is an investigation into whether a series of gatherings held at Johnson's 10 Downing Street residence broke COVID lockdown rules and found there were, quote, failures of leadership and judgment by different parts of Number 10 and the Cabinet Office, and that more than a dozen social gatherings took place. Johnson apologized to Parliament in yesterday's fiery and emotional debate.
Firstly, I want to say sorry. And I'm sorry for the things we simply didn't get right, and also sorry for the way that this matter has been handled. And it's no use saying that this or that was within the rules, and it's no use saying that people were working hard. This pandemic was hard for everyone. We asked people across this country to make the most extraordinary sacrifices. I get it, and I will fix it.
NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons is with us now. So, Keir, this was only a preliminary report, but it was pretty damning. What are the key headlines here?
Yeah, it was pretty damning. And, Joe, to give you a picture of the split screen here in Britain right now, as we speak, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is headed to Ukraine to meet with President Zelensky with this damning report still in his inbox. That's why it matters for the Biden administration, because, of course, Britain is a key ally on crucial foreign policy issues, crises like Ukraine. And the details of this report are a difficult read for the Prime Minister. It says some behaviour at gatherings was difficult to justify. It even talks about the excessive consumption of alcohol. It talks about a serious failure to observe standards, failures of leadership and judgment. It says some events should not have taken place at all. So there was some events, for example, that were in the Prime Minister's apartment in Downing Street, his private flat. And again, that conclusion that there was an excessive consumption of alcohol that was not appropriate. I mean, rough translation of that, Joe, people were drunk. And we're talking about inside Downing Street, the head of the British government, one of the most famous political offices in the world. Pretty extraordinary. One political journalist here describing Downing Street as more like a medieval court than a modern government office.
Yeah, so Keir, let's talk about what's next. Even before this report was released, there were calls for Johnson to resign. So how did his apology go down in Parliament? Can he survive this?
Yeah, good question. He can for now. There were raucous scenes in Parliament. There often are, of course. There was strong words from the leader of the opposition. Take a listen.
By routinely breaking the rules he set, the Prime Minister took us all for fools. He held people sacrificing contempt. He showed himself unfit for office. But, Prime Minister, the British public aren't fools. They never believed a word of it. They think the Prime Minister should do the decent thing and resign. Of course he won't, because he is a man without shame.
Well, they can laugh. They can laugh. But the public know. The public know this is a man they can no longer trust. He has been investigated by the police. He misled the House. He must now resign.
What was really stunning, though, Joe, was the former Prime Minister Theresa May calling Boris Johnson effectively either arrogant or incompetent. His own party criticising him in the House of Commons.
And that may be key moving forward. All right, Keir Simmons, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
And now to some big news on the COVID front. Pfizer could be filing for authorization of its vaccine for kids under the age of 5, according to a new Washington Post report. Now, for a 2-dose regimen for kids 6 months old to 5 years old, we could see that happen as early as today. A potential 3-dose regimen is still being tested, and data from those trials won't be available until late March. We reached out to Pfizer and they said, quote, at this time, we have not filed a submission and we're continuing to collect and analyze data from both 2 and 3 doses in our younger age cohort. As part of our ongoing commitment, we will share new updates as they become available. We've also got news on the Moderna shot. The FDA has granted that full approval in the U.S., making it the second COVID vaccine to receive that full regulatory approval. The vaccine will now be called Spikevax and is approved for anyone 18 and older. Dr. Ebony Jade Hilton joins us now on all this. She's a professor of anesthesiology and critical care medicine and the co-founder of Goodstock Consulting. Dr. Hilton, good morning. Thanks for being here. So what do we need to know about shots for kids younger than 5 years old, especially knowing that the numbers for kids who are already eligible are not all that high? What do you want parents of young children to know who are maybe nervous about this?
Right. Well, what I hope parents see is that the process, the scientific process of proving these agents to be safe has been followed. There's not been a rushed out thing for our children. Literally adults, we've been now being able to be vaccinated for over a year. I received my first dose on December 15, 2020. And so we did the right thing about making sure this is safe for our children. And at this point, we have 3,800 kids hospitalized with COVID. This is not the time to say, well, maybe my child will be the lucky one and get COVID and not pass away. We know, unfortunately, some children are experiencing some severe disease with COVID-19. And if you can vaccinate your child for that protection, it is greatly worth it.
And Doctor, I want to ask you about that other news that I mentioned, Moderna now fully approved by the FDA. First, does it change anything about how the vaccine is administered on your end? What's that process like? And then also, do you think that more people would maybe get this shot now that it's fully approved? Maybe somebody who had been hesitant to get vaccinated when it just had that emergency use authorization?
Right. You know, it's one of those things. I don't know what would cause those other persons who are anti-vax at this point to tip over. I do not know. But what I will stress to them is that if we look at hospitalizations this past weekend, from Sunday, we had a decrease in hospitalization by 3,000 people, right? 3,007 people decrease in hospitalization. But we had deaths of 3,377 people yesterday. So that decrease in hospitalization is not because those persons necessarily went home. It's because they went to a different level of home. And I hope everyone understands that this is not a pandemic that is over, that unfortunately we are still losing on average one person every 34 seconds in America. And if we're looking at our case number, oftentimes people can breathe a sigh of relief because our case numbers are decreasing, but it's not in all states. In 14 states, we have increase in case numbers. And it's in those smaller states, those rural areas. And so making sure that your family is vaccinated, making sure you're boosted, those are going to be the things that protect you during this next surge.
And Dr. Hilton, while I've got you, I want to get a viewer question in. Rick Eller asks, Omicron is dominant. Are the previous variations, alpha, beta, et cetera, still around, or have they been, quote unquote, eradicated?
Right. And they're very much still around, right? They can be in smaller numbers, but not only is Omicron, we know we have BA2, which is, we're calling it a stealth Omicron, that is also being reported now in the United States of America, in Denmark, across Europe. We know that there are going to be other variants that come. And so it's one of those things. I say, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, meaning that when the next variant comes, of which there will be another variant, if you are already vaccinated, if you're already boosted, if you've already made N95 masks your routine, then you won't get surprised by the next wave that comes across, and you and your family can live to see what 2023 looks like.
Dr. Ebony Jade Hilton, thank you so much. And if you have a question for one of our doctors, let us know. They're ready to answer them. Email us at morningnewsnow@NBCUNI.com. You can let us know if you want to stay anonymous. And thanks to those who have sent them in.
Breaking news out of North Carolina this morning. A massive fire has erupted inside a fertilizer plant in Winston-Salem. Firefighters were forced to abandon their efforts to contain the flames. That's because the plant has large volumes of ammonium nitrate, which could cause an explosion if the fire reaches it. Some 6,000 people living within a 1-mile area around the plant have been told to evacuate. So far, no injuries have been reported. No word yet on what started the fire.
And it seems there's another major storm developing in the Midwest. For the latest on what to expect, let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Michelle Grossman is with us. Michelle, good morning.
Good morning, guys. Yeah, just 3 days after our nor'easter, we are tracking another powerful winter storm. There are some differences, though. With the nor'easter, it was all snow. It moved out pretty quickly. It was said and done in 24 hours. This is going to move painfully slow. We're going to be tracking this through Friday, and we're going to introduce some ice, too. So that makes for very dangerous conditions. Let's look at the winter alerts, because we already have 62 million Americans impacted. Where you see the white, that is your winter weather advisory. The pink is your winter storm warning, and the blue is your winter storm watch. So we are going to look at dangerous ice conditions over the next several days. Here is the setup. We have a sweeping cold front. Ahead of that cold front, we have really warm air, almost tropical-like air coming from the Gulf of Mexico. It's going to continue to draw that moisture. Rain and snow from Texas to Michigan. And then look what happens as we go throughout Wednesday. Again, this front is moving very, very slowly. This storm will blossom. So now you notice some blue. You notice some pink on the map. That pink is some ice. So Dallas, you're affected with some ice. Oklahoma City, you're into the snow. And this is stretching all the way from the southern plains to the Great Lakes and then eventually into the interior Northeast. So very difficult travel, slippery conditions. Even some power outages is what we're going to be watching over the next several days. This is Thursday. We're now into the Ohio Valley, snow stretching from the Northeast, still into the southern plains, moving very, very slowly. We're looking at some ice and also some rain on the warm side of the storm. And it's really not out of here until Friday. So this is a picture on Friday. We're looking at mainly rain, but along the I-95, we could see little bursts of ice with that cold air really working in. Here's your ice forecast. This is what we're most concerned with: dangerous driving conditions, down trees leading to power outages, because we're going to have really cold conditions, many spots below freezing for an extended period of time, 2-3 days. So we could see 1/4 of an inch of ice in some spots, Paducah into Cincinnati. And just to remind you, because now is the time to prepare, up to 1/4 inch of ice. You could see some slick roads, some bridges, hazardous travel, the icy glaze on the trees where it kind of looks pretty. 1/4 to 1/2 inch, that's when we're going to see those trees coming down and those power outages. And then above that, we could see extended periods of power outages. Back to you guys.
All right.
Ooh. Lots of ice.
Exactly. We know to
ice
keep an eye on it.
forecast when that's the title of your graphic. All right, Michelle. Thanks. See you next hour.
Coming up, a plea deal rejected for two of the men facing hate crime charges in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. More on the move by a federal judge and what it all means for the case.
And crisis in the Amazon. The cleanup underway as contamination concerns grow after a massive oil spill in the rainforest. You're watching Morning News Now.
We have new developments in the federal hate crime case against Travis and Gregory McMichael, two of the men convicted of murdering Ahmaud Arbery.
Yeah, a federal judge in Georgia rejected a plea deal prosecutors had struck with the defendants over the weekend. The terms had been objected by Arbery's parents. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos has been following the case, and he joins us now. Hi, Danny. Good morning. So what do we know about the judge's decision to reject this plea bargain?
Not a lot, in that we know that the judge apparently realized that the prosecutor and the family were much farther apart than initially they indicated. In fact, the prosecution and the family appeared to be on two totally different pages, one believing they had the family's agreement and the family apparently not agreeing. But here's the key. The family or a victim does not get to guide the prosecution. The government, the DOJ, makes those decisions. The family and the victims are not the client of the government. So, but I should add that federal law, the Crime Victims' Rights Act, allows families and victims the right to at least be heard at things like sentencing hearings and plea hearings. So they have a voice. The extent to which the judge and the prosecutor has to take that voice into account, kind of a gray area.
So, Danny, as you mentioned, the Arbery family slammed the deal, saying prosecutors went behind their back. Here's some of what Arbery's mother had to say about that yesterday.
It's disrespectful. I fought so hard to get these guys in state prison. And once I gave them, I told them very, very adamantly that I wanted them to go to state prison and do their time that Judge Wamsley gave them back on the 7th of January. Then I got up this morning and found out that they had accepted this ridiculous plea. Very disrespectful.
So, Danny, you touched on this already, but I mean, how much do prosecutors weigh what the victim's family thinks about this, and what happens now moving forward here?
The federal law requires prosecutors to at least have contact with the family and keep them apprised of what's going on, but they don't have to take orders from the family. Now, in most cases, I should say in some cases, families are happy about a plea agreement because it gives them certainty. The family is getting something in return. They're avoiding the risk of a trial and the risk of an acquittal. But in this case, it appears that Arbery's family is not happy with the deal reached, and it isn't outweighed by the fact that these men are going to be pleading guilty. I kind of sympathize with them because, look, they already are guilty in the state case. They already have substantial prison terms. It may seem to these to the family members that this is just a reduction of the state sentence itself if they get to serve it in federal prison.
And hey, Danny, quickly, a third man convicted of killing Arbery has also been charged in the federal hate crimes case. William Bryan, he's the one who recorded the death, as some people might remember. Why wasn't he included in this deal, and what's next for his federal case?
Most likely because he wanted no part of it. I mean, from the beginning, Bryan's entire position has been, those guys are different. That father and son duo, they had the guns. They were the ones who were armed, and I didn't even communicate with them. Look for Bryan, who is not the father or son team, to going forward in appeal, essentially argue that I had nothing to do with those guys, and my verdict was against the great weight of the evidence. So he's going to separate himself and continue to do so.
All right, Danny Ceballos, thank you so much.
A massive cleanup effort is underway this morning in Ecuador after an oil spill in the country's Amazon rainforest. Images captured by an activist show a damaged pipeline spraying crude oil. Indigenous communities in the region fear that could threaten their waterways. NBC News Now correspondent Priscilla Thompson has details.
Beneath the lush green canopy of the Amazon rainforest, disaster and devastation. A continuous spray of crude oil gushing from a busted pipe into Ecuador's rainforest. Landscapes once green, now coated in black. These images shared by the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of Ecuador on Friday, just after the spill began. Now, the Ecuadorian government says they're preparing legal action against OCP Ecuador, the company in charge of the country's second largest pipeline. The company says a rock slide in the Piedrafena zone caused the pipe to bust, impacting more than 220,000 square feet of protected land and water, according to government officials. Land that is home to indigenous communities, rare wildlife, and plants.
Aquí nos encontramos la dirección zonal 8, la dirección zonal 9, para ver que toda esta remediación quede en perfectas y óptimas condiciones para el bienestar de todas las personas y que no haya afectación a terceros.
OCP Ecuador said Saturday that the pipeline through which 450,000 barrels of oil flow daily had stopped production and that the spill had been contained, so, quote, it cannot contaminate any bodies of water. But some on the ground say they're feeling anything but safe.
The oil companies that come to our land to destroy it bring with them so much noise that is not native to the rainforest. These oil and mineral companies are destroying our land, and they leave only contamination, sickness, and death.
NBC News first spoke to Nemo Gigita, a leader of the Guarani people, in November. She says the latest oil spill has reached the banks of the Coca River, calling the situation, quote, critical, because more than 60,000 people depend on water from this river.
We know these pipelines are going to spill. It's a question of when, not if. Clearly, government and company claims of environmental responsibility and safeguards are not working, and that's taking a devastating toll on the lives and livelihoods of indigenous people who live there.
Kevin Koning has spent more than 2 decades working with indigenous groups in the Amazon, and he says there's no slowdown in sight as Ecuador's president has promised to double oil production and open new parts of the rainforest to exploration.
What responsibility, if any, do Americans have in all of this?
Consumers here in the United States, have to realize that there is a price that is being paid in those communities where oil is being extracted.
That was Priscilla Thompson reporting.
Let's now take a look at what else is making news around the world this morning.
Ali Arouzi joins us from Tehran. Ali, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning, Savannah. The U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention has advised against travel to a dozen destinations, including Mexico, Brazil, Singapore, Ecuador, Philippines, and Paraguay. The CDC now lists nearly 130 countries and territories with COVID-19 cases as level 4, very high. An online news outlet in Mexico said that one of its journalists was shot to death, the 4th journalist to be killed in the country in less than a month. Armando Linares, the director of the news outlet, said that 3 assailants fatally shot Roberto Toledo. Prosecutors say they're investigating report. Linares said the website had received threats for reporting on governmental corruption. And finally, a flamingo called Cora Cora was returned to the wild at a lagoon in Bolivia. The bird had dislocated its leg and needed surgery and rehabilitation before it could return to its natural habitat. Oh. Those are your headlines, guys.
Wow. Right, good for Cora Cora. Looks like ready to go.
Fixed Cora.
They need those legs. So,
yeah.
All right.
Stand on one leg again.
There you go. Exactly. Thank you, Ali.
Thanks. All right. Coming up on Morning News Now, officers on leave. New developments in the investigation into the death of a woman after an online date, as we learn more about a similar case in the same city that same day.
Plus, move over sleep sounds. There's a new trick on TikTok to get you snoozing in less than 2 minutes. But does it really work? If it does, I'll join TikTok. Yeah. We're going to talk to a professional about this and more in our weekly check-in. Looks like the New York Times is the big winner when it comes to the latest internet game sensation, the popular word puzzle Wordle. The Times announced yesterday it is purchasing the game from software engineer Josh Wordle for a price in the low 7 figures. Wordle created Wordle back in October after he and his partner got into playing the Times crosswords and spelling bee games during the pandemic. Wordle is a free game that gives people 6 tries without any hints to try and guess a new 5-letter word each day. Get this, just 90 people were playing Wordle back in November. So now it's estimated millions play every day, and they're proudly posting their daily results, filling social media with green, yellow, and gray squares. The purchase is part of the New York Times effort to increase its digital subscriptions. The company says the game will initially remain free for new and existing players. The big question everyone is asking is, how long will that last?
Yeah, not long.
Yeah.
What's going to be behind?
Hopefully they give it some time, because people, I'm addicted. I've been doing it for 3 weeks. I look forward to it every day.
Were you one of the 90?
It doesn't take much time. I was not one of the 90, no. Ooh, that's very specific. That was like his aunt and his cousins and like. Yeah.
How large is his family? Exactly. Those were
yeah.
all the players. All right. Low 7 figures. I mean.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah.
All right, there you have it. Hopefully it stays free. All right, now this morning we have new developments in the case of Lauren Smithfields, the Black 23-year-old woman found dead in her apartment in Bridgeport, Connecticut back in December. 2 detectives have now been suspended for their handling of the investigation, and it comes as another family demands justice after a 53-year-old Black woman was found dead in the same city on the same day. NBC News Now correspondent Zincle Esamoah has the latest.
2 Connecticut detectives suspended and placed on administrative leave in an announcement from Bridgeport's mayor. They're accused of mishandling investigations into the deaths of 2 Black women.
I am extremely disappointed with the leadership of the Bridgeport Police Department and have found the actions taken up to this point with regards to these 2 investigations unacceptable.
Lauren Smithfields and Brenda Lee Rawls found dead the same day in the same city. Now the families of those women are speaking out.
They treated her as if they found a body on the street with no identification or anything. That was very disrespectful.
Following their criticism and community demonstrations, the detectives Kevin Cronin and Angel Llanos now temporarily off the job and under investigation.
For lack of sensitivity to the public, for failure to follow police policy in the handling of these 2 matters.
Just 2 weeks before Christmas, Lauren Smithfields was found dead in her apartment. The family previously told NBC they were not notified by police within 24 hours and had challenges contacting the detective on the case.
He told me directly on the phone, stop calling me, and hung up in my face.
Right. Exactly.
Like, it was just total disrespect.
Exactly.
According to a police incident report provided by the family attorney, the 23-year-old was found by a 37-year-old white man she allegedly met on the dating app Bumble. NBC is not naming him because he has not been charged.
We know that if it was a Black male with a white female that was found dead at 23 years old, this person would have been a person of interest, and that didn't happen here.
The 2 families are now represented by the same lawyer, Darnell Crossland, the family preparing to sue the city of Bridgeport for its, quote, racially insensitive handling of the case. The Connecticut chief medical examiner ruled Smithfield's cause of death an accident due to acute drug-related intoxication. Now police say there's a criminal investigation into Smithfield's death. After the mayor's announcement on Sunday, the family called for more accountability, asking why the evidence the family collected at the scene, including blood-stained sheets, a sedative pill, and a used condom, was not immediately sent to the lab for testing.
I want an outside investigation. We want the Department of Justice to come in and do their own investigation.
On the same day of Lauren Smithfield's death, Brenda Lee Rawls was found dead at a Bridgeport residence, according to the family.
Did the police ever contact you regarding the fact that your sister had died or where her remains were?
No. We had to do practically our own investigation. This detective that was supposed to be on Brenda case, I called 4 to 5 times. He never, ever called me back.
The family says Rawls went to a man's house the evening of December 11th. They didn't hear from her for 2 days. When they went to his house on December 14th,
is Brenda there? And he said, no, Brenda passed away on Sunday. He claimed that he tried to wake her up and she wouldn't wake up. There was no scene investigation. His apartment, his house was not quarantined to collect evidence. We're not getting any answers from the police department.
Rawls' cause of death has not yet been determined. The detectives on leave, Cronin and Llanos, did not immediately respond to our requests for comment.
I mean, whatever happened that night, we want to know. And we want to feel like that they care as much as we care.
Our thanks to Zincle Esamoah for that report, who spoke directly with the attorney representing the victims' families, who said in the Smithfield case they intend to sue for at least $30 million in punitive damages, and no notice of claim has been filed in the case of Rawls yet, but he says that's something we can definitely expect.
It's Tuesday, which means it's time now for our weekly mental health check-in. We're taking a moment to reflect on some of the biggest mental health headlines and how they might be affecting you.
Yeah, let's bring in Dr. Erica Richards to help guide us through some of these topics. Dr. Richards is the chair of psychiatry at Sibley Memorial Hospital and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Medicine.
Good to have you with us, Doctor. So let's start with COVID anxiety. We've seen the guidelines change as the science is updated, as new variants emerge, but the headlines can still be pretty scary. Hospitalization rates, long COVID. So how do we start to go about our daily routines, minimize some of the COVID fears without maybe giving up some of the protections that help us feel safe?
Good morning, Savannah and Joe. Such a good question, such timely articles. So what's become evident is that we really need to learn how to live with the existence of COVID, not wait until COVID goes away to return to our normal lives. So on that note, we have to acknowledge it's been a very difficult 22 months, and a lot of that's been rooted in fear. Fear serves a purpose. It keeps us safe. It teaches us to avoid danger, and it helps us avoid threat. And in all fairness, it's probably kept a lot of people from catching COVID over the past nearly 2 years. But there's an issue, there's a consequence, and too much fear can lead to mental health issues. So at Johns Hopkins Hospital, what we're seeing is when people are living in a constant state of fear, there's more depression, there's more anxiety, there's more unhealthy eating habits, the use of alcohol and drugs. So we want people to start to understand how to understand the fear, but how to get out with it. So there's 3 important concepts to remember. The vaccines are available, masks help prevent the spread, and that there's safe ways to gather and to practice self-care. We want people to start to implement those things.
And one of the things that people might start to deal with as we kind of return to normal is returning to their office after nearly 2 years, in some cases, of working from home. Concerns about the return can range from convenience to health and safety in the office. What can people do to try to get comfortable with going back to the office, and any tips for employees to effectively communicate any concerns they might have?
So there's a great Vogue article that discusses this. And what I think has happened is that the return to work has been delayed at least twice for most people with each surge. And so what we have to accept is that at some point, in some form, people will return to the office. And we want them to be prepared for that. There's 3 things that I want to highlight from that article that people should consider. Number 1, feel free to ask questions and share your concerns. If it's a fear about catching COVID, if it's a fear about the commute, if it's childcare, really bring these up in a safe setting. Maybe your employers haven't thought about this. Maybe you're highlighting some things that they need to fix before people get back to the office. So that's number 1. Number 2, incorporate home comfort. If it's coffee, if it's tea, if it's something else that you need, take that with you. And number 3, set goals. Figure out how you plan to improve your career, your trajectory, and what you want to accomplish going back into the office, at least part-time.
All right, we teased this one. TikTok, a new trend is circulating, how to fall asleep in under 2 minutes. The claim is the trick is to clear your mind. I can't read. And then picture a calming scenario. We're a little tight on time here, but does something like this actually work?
Yeah.
It does work. It does work. This is a personal trainer out of Montreal and it's important to understand, we've coined the term pandemic insomnia because we know that more people are having difficulty with sleep. It implements mindfulness technique. Clear your mind, rest your body, and prepare to be in that moment to fall asleep.
All right. Sometimes easier said than done. But
yeah,
give
definitely. Because I feel like it's what I try to do, but I do have issues.
And then you start thinking about other things.
Yeah.
All right. As always, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Coming up, a deep freeze in Florida causing problems for farmers.
When we return, the fight underway to save their crops and their livelihoods. That's up next on Morning News Now.
As the Northeast digs out from a major snowstorm, farmers all the way down in Florida are fighting to save their crops after a deep freeze there.
Yeah, the bitter cold is only the latest in a series of challenges, actually, that citrus farmers have faced in recent years. And it's likely to affect consumers far beyond the Sunshine State. NBC News correspondent Carrie Sanders has more.
The race is on to pick as many strawberries as possible. Growers say, despite the freezing temperatures, it appears their crops survived. In the battle to save Florida's crops from the freezing cold, some farmers this week launched an aerial assault, deployed more than 24 helicopters.
Helicopter is trying to push warmer air down on the crops to try to save it. Sometimes it works, but sometimes it don't.
Just about 2 years ago, these same farmers plowed under abundant crops as the pandemic broke supply lines, costing them millions, and the hits keep coming.
Our fuel costs are double, our fertilizer costs are 65% higher, and now we're facing the freeze.
Florida's citrus growers, desperate to save their fruit, have iced it over, locking it in at 32 degrees as ambient temperatures drop even lower.
See, that's actually freezing it. We've had three days of freezes, and this is some damage from that.
Florida is on pace to produce the smallest crop of oranges since World War II. Larry Black's family began citrus farming in the 1800s. Is the freeze that you just had, is that the biggest problem?
No, the biggest issue is citrus greening.
And when a tree is hit with that disease, it drops its fruit early, upwards of 40%. That is a complete loss.
We've been dealing with the disease for about 15 years, citrus greening. This is before the freeze, was going to be the smallest crop since the 1940s.
With the freeze, the price of some fruits and vegetables will now rise at the grocery store as farmers across the state scramble to harvest what survived. A strawberry begins as this bloom, and 21 days later, looks like this. The good news? That means they'll be ripe again for Valentine's Day.
Good news. Gary Sanders, thank you so much.
And now it's time for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Silvana Henao is with us this morning. Good morning, Silvana.
Hey guys, good morning. Well, the Federal Trade Commission says criminals use social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and WhatsApp to scam nearly $800 million from people last year. That's up almost 18-fold over the past 4 years and now accounts for about a quarter of all fraud losses nationwide. The FTC says the recent surge in online investing is a big target for scams, which involve not only stocks, bonds, and cryptocurrency, but also art, precious metals, and even investment advice. Sony is buying video game maker Bungie for $3.6 billion. Bungie is the original creator of Halo and the developer of Destiny. The deal comes just a few weeks after Microsoft paid nearly $68 billion for Activision Blizzard and Take-Two bid $11 billion for Zynga, the maker of Words with Friends. The video game space is consolidating as companies look to tap a surge in demand created by the pandemic. And Domino's will pay you to pick up your own pizza. The chain will offer customers a $3 credit through the end of May if they choose carryout over delivery for online orders. The credit is good for a week and can be used on another carryout order. Domino's, like other restaurants, is having a hard time getting enough drivers. Delivery accounts for 2/3 of the company's sales. Guys?
All right.
Well, you know what I'm going to say. Now I want Domino's for lunch. I'm looking at those pictures before 8 a.m. It's so hard.
All right.
I'm hungry.
Yeah, exactly.
Pizza for lunch. All right.
Thanks, Silvana.
Thank you. Coming up, finding a safe space at the skating rink.
This is a place to come where we can just gather. And the main feedback that I get from people is like, just thank you.
When we return, more on the retro trend connecting queer people of color. This is Morning News Now. Welcome back. Roller skating rinks were once really a place to meet friends for fun on the weekend.
Now, a new group in New York City is using roller skating to create a safe space for queer people of color to connect.
Trains going express the green point. Stand clear to close the doors, please.
I think I skate, it's supposed to be twice a week, but it's usually more like 6 times a week. If I'm not at the rink, I'm just skating around the house. Honestly, if I could sleep in my skates, I probably would. I am the founder of Orbit Collective, a safe space for Black and brown, queer, gender nonconforming skaters. The idea for Orbit Collective started as seeking community and seeking, I guess, my tribe. I identify as a queer non-binary femme. I know that there's plenty of Black and POC skaters.
Ooh, do the table, do the table.
There's a rich culture, especially in New York. But specifically for queer skaters, that's the crowd that I love to be around.
Serve the camera, baby. Serve it.
In New York City proper, the only rink that we have is Crazy Legs. And it's not even a rink, it's a gym. There were a ton at one point. I'm always heartbroken that I wasn't alive to experience them. So way before my time, we had transitioned from the disco era to hip hop. They took the disco records and then started scratching them up and making beats and then rhyming over them, and then hip hop was born in the Bronx. A lot of those artists I know got their start in rinks.
Roller skating, it's more than fun, it's art.
Back before all of that, roller skating was actually very segregated. There was a lot of restrictions. There were only designated nights for Black and POC people to skate, and that was it. There was a lot of protesting and speaking up for your rights in terms of having permission to even skate. Given what my ancestors had to deal with just to have the opportunity to skate, I think it's amazing to carry on their legacy. And I will say that skating, especially with a lot of like older generations, has connected me to music that I wasn't around to hear in a different way. When you have these labels of like queer or non-binary or anything like that, by default you have to have an armor up because the world isn't as open or sensitive to these identities. There are things that you have to deal with, things like sexual harassment, unfortunately. Skating in and of itself is a very individual sport, but there's also partner skating and like group skating, and so sometimes certain touches or whatnot can be very inappropriate or feel uncomfortable, but we always practice open consent.
Right back there. Oh.
This is a place to come where we can just gather, and the main feedback that I get from people is like, just thank you. And then also the other key word is, I feel safe.
Very cool. I feel safe. Those words mean a lot.
Yeah, they really do. Also, it kind of makes me want to get out on some skates. I bet I would be not good at all, though.
Neither would I.
Yeah.
I see a story.
Yeah, I know, really.
Savannah
Yeah,
us on skates. That does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
But the news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.